Good Thursday afternoon to you. I hope you're having a great day. Thanks for joining us on Sports4CLE. Plenty to talk about a little later in the show. Sam Amico from hoopswire.com will join us. We'll talk some Cavs. They are locked into the play-in tournament. We'll take a look at the play-in tournament, some scenarios with Sam Amico from hoopswire.com. But we begin by talking Browns and some interesting talk. There continues to be talk out of Seattle that DK Metcalf may be available and that the Seahawks may be listening to trades. Along those lines, ESPN.com has put out a number of offers that they think make sense. So let's take a look at one of them. Jake Trotter from ESPN has the Browns trading a 2023 second-round pick and Baker Mayfield for DK Metcalf. And if there's any way that the Seattle Seahawks are willing to do that, I'm guessing Andrew Berry and the Browns would be all in. Let's welcome in Quincy Carrier. We've talked to Quincy Browns for a number of times here in Quincy. Sign me up for that trade like as often as you would like to. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, if we could get rid of Baker, only a second-round pick and get DK Metcalf, I think that's going to be something that a lot of people would be interested in. I don't think it's very realistic in happening just because I think we're looking at this as if Baker Mayfield has positive trade value to people, and at $18 million, he just doesn't. Again, you can eat some of that and try to make that more positive, but you know, we'll see what happens with Baker in the coming weeks. With how he continues to handle this situation, but I'm just not confident that this is going to be handled in a way that it's going to that his value is going to jump up anytime soon. So I think we're going to be looking down the barrel of replacing him, or just like straight outright just eating the cap number for him and releasing him.
The thing that I would say, and I'm not disagreeing with you by any stretch, but when you keep hearing guys like DK Metcalf attached to other teams, usually when there's smoke like that, there's some fire to it. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks potentially move on from him. A viewer last week suggested this trade, and let me run it by you, see what you think. Lockett for Baker Mayfield from Seattle. That one makes a little bit more sense because it would allow the Seahawks to use their first pick, which is 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that, on one of the young, talented wide receivers. They would get Mayfield on a one-year trial, and the cap numbers, the salary numbers for Lockett and Mayfield pretty much offset each other. They're in the ballpark. Do you buy that at all?
It could. It could have. I just don't know where teams are at with Baker Mayfield, right? Like, do they actually think he's a positive in a trade, right? Because that's what we're assuming when we're saying, hey, we're going to get Tyler Lockett for Baker Mayfield, is that the Seattle Seahawks are going to assume that that's going to be a positive in a trade. They might be in a situation where it's like Jared Goff, where like teams just think this is a negative and they're not willing to give up anything to take him on because they don't want to assume any risk that comes with him. Like, I just don't know where teams are, and I don't know if you trade for Tyler Lockett, if Baker Mayfield becomes something that you have to compensate with hiring your draft compensation for it, right? Like, I don't know where teams are at. It would seem like it, right? Because if he was seen as an asset, he would be moved by now. And the fact that he's not moved yet, and like not just not moved, but dead silent on the trade wire, then, you know, it's kind of a concern there that, hey, interest isn't out there. So maybe he isn't looked at it like that. And they're just, teams are willing to wait till he gets cut and then kick the tires on him.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right. I know you've discussed this on your show as well. What do you think about Donovan Peoples-Jones and Schwartz, just the perception and the perspective that they have with their value for the Browns?
Now, Anthony Schwartz is a little bit of a different story than Donovan Peoples-Jones because Anthony Schwartz had some weird moments throughout the year, right? With Baker Mayfield specifically. Like, you could tell when Baker would target Anthony Schwartz, he was constantly like barking at the guy, right? And I don't know if that was Anthony Schwartz's fault or Baker Mayfield's fault. Both of them have proven to be unreliable narrators when it comes to this. But that's been a concern about Anthony Schwartz. Like, does he not know the offense? But then you look at the games where Case Keenum was in there and he was able to get more targets. It seemed like it wasn't an issue, and it seemed like it was really only an issue when Baker Mayfield was out there. So that's a little bit of a concern. Donovan Peoples-Jones is another one where he had an excellent camp, and I think he had an excellent start to the year. He just didn't get the ball a lot, right? He was out there a ton. He only got 4 targets in the first 4 games of the year, went a whole game without any targets in Minnesota. And that didn't make sense because when you looked at the tape, he was open pretty consistently. Now, in the later part of the year, I think he got a little unfocused, made some of those, patented Donovan Peoples-Jones plays that kind of like make you wonder what he was thinking when he did it down the stretch. But that was when everybody at that point had given up on the season. So I don't know how much of that I can individually blame on him and how much of that is to the quarterback, right? So I think Donovan Peoples-Jones, Anthony Schwartz, those are 2 interesting people to watch going forward, because I don't think this front office thinks that Anthony Schwartz isn't going to be somebody, right? I think they think that he's going to turn into something. They spun a 3rd-round pick on him. And Donovan Peoples-Jones did look promising, and it looked like quarterback play may have played a factor into why he didn't show the promise that he looked like he could have.
Let's turn our attention to another wide receiver that the Browns acquired, Amari Cooper. What do you think the fit is in Kevin Stefanski's offense and how he fits into the Browns?
The fit is excellent. It is excellent fit. If you look at what he likes to do, right? Amari's not going to run a lot of 9 routes, a lot of goes, but he is going to run routes where he cuts to either the in or out of the field from outside the numbers, right? And that's what Deshaun Watson likes to do. If you have gone back to Deshaun Watson's tape and you look at the Clemson stuff, right? Remember the game versus Alabama, national championship game, everything's on the line. What's the play that you go to? Roll out to a shallow out to Hunter Renfrow, right? That's his go-to play. Amari Cooper might be one of the best runners of that specific route in the NFL. So you get that paired up with a guy like Deshaun Watson, who loves throwing that, loves throwing slants, loves throwing posts, loves throwing corners, loves throwing those breaking routes, right? Because he could throw with anticipation, and you have a wide receiver who thrives with anticipation. And one of the things that Dak Prescott does not do well, that Deshaun does at an exceedingly high level, is throw with anticipation. Dak, he'll be behind you a little bit, right? And you're not going to catch him in stride. If you watch Deshaun Watson and how accurate he is with the football, sometimes it's almost like the ball just appears into the wide receiver's hands. It doesn't get thrown. It just teleports there. So that's something to look out for, but I think it's going to be very interesting to see what this fit is going forward. I find it hard to think that this won't be a great fit.
Yeah, and again, I'm sure that was Andrew Berry's mindset in kind of pairing the 2 of them together as well. This one's a little interesting. So this is from CBSSports.com. The 15 richest owners in the NFL. Now, top of that is David Tepper, $16.7 billion with a B. That is substantially higher than Stan Kroenke, Jerry Jones at $10 billion. Jimmy Haslam comes in there at $3.8 billion with a B. Same as Gail Benson, owner of the Saints. So Jimmy Haslam has plenty of money to spend. We can spend some of his money on free agents or eating cap numbers. He's got a lot to do, and has shown that he's willing to spend the money as well.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, right? When you look at that list, it can be fooling sometimes, right? Because some of these guys can have $5.8 billion, but they don't have it in liquid assets, right? They have it in valuation and number of things that they own. Yeah, they do have that much money in value, but that doesn't mean that they can access that money right away, right? The one thing that separates Jimmy Haslam from a lot of different owners, and why you have heard owners kicking and screaming about that guaranteed contract and about guaranteed contracts in general, is because in order to give a high guarantee, you got to do that in cash. You can't pay that in credit, right? Like, you got to pay that upfront in cash, put it in escrow the second that contract signed, because it's guaranteed money. You can't just take that on a handshake deal, right? That's guaranteed money. It goes into escrow. And some teams just don't have that, right? The reason why Mike Brown was complaining when the Haslams did that is because if Joe Burrow wants that kind of money, I don't know if Mike Brown has $230 million of expendable money to just put in escrow for a player. Like, that's not a luxury that he has. A lot of people in the NFL, you'd be surprised, or owners in the NFL, don't have that kind of flexibility with their money, and it becomes an issue. This has popped up with the Raiders and Mark Davis. He does not have the level of liquid money. It's going to pop up with the Bengals because all of their money is wrapped up in owning the Bengals, right? Like they don't really own anything else outside of that. And yeah, they're worth $3.8 billion because the Bengals are worth $3.8 billion, but that don't mean they have access to that money. So that's another thing to watch. Some of these guys are worth a lot of money, but they might not have access to that money, or they might not be willing to access that money, right? Because this might be, instead of it being the whole business venture, like for the Haslam family, owning the Browns is everything that they want to do. It's their main goal. It's their main thing that they do now because they don't even run Pilot anymore. So all that money that he has, $3.8 billion, that goes towards the Browns, right? Like he focuses that on the Browns. But if you have somebody like a David Tepper, who maybe he cares about football, but he has his hands in other entities, right? Like the Khan family. They own a wrestling company. They own a Premier League soccer team, and they own the Jaguars. So that money's spread out between like 5 different interests, and then they have their own business interests on top of that. So, it could get complicated when you look at money, but the thing with Haslam is that Haslam really just owns the Browns. So he has an advantage in that where all his expendable money really just goes towards the football team. And that is a luxury that a lot of other owners really don't have. And that's why they're mad right now. Like that, keep in mind that is why they're mad, because they now have to reach into their bag and get that cash when they did not have to before, right? You can sign somebody to a $400 million contract with $40 million guaranteed. You only got to get the $40 million out, right? It ain't that big of a deal. But when you got to put that in cash day one in escrow, that starts to change people's minds.
Yep. And that is a very valid point. If you have a guaranteed contract, that money has to be in escrow. All right, Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we continue talking Browns. Just how much will the Browns ascend in the NFL? Straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.